Hi, my name is John, and I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've been a member of this church for the better part of my adult life. My wife and I were married in the Philadelphia Temple, and we currently reside in Jackson County, Missouri. I began this YouTube channel as an effort to provide a comprehensive, academic-based, verse-by-verse scripture study with an LDS lens. I'm the author of a book called Famine in Zion, which is available for free on answerthemessengers.com. And that book encompasses my philosophy about scriptural literacy, as well as a critical analysis of the decline of scriptural literacy within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the process of creating videos for this YouTube channel, there have been a number of interesting comments in the comment sections along the way, because my presentation is grounded in an academic focus, certainly blended with that LDS perspective. However, I try to maintain a certain level of objectivity, which at times may clash with an Orthodox LDS view. And I'm realizing that some people just don't know what to make of that. I've received comments from non-LDS Christians who praise me for railing on the false church of the Mormons, the cult of heretical Christians, and then I have to clarify, oh, I actually am a Latter-day Saint. And then I get comments from members of the church who sometimes are a little confused about whether this is a devotional, sometimes it's treated like that, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where they feel that I am putting out some kind of anti-Mormon content. And then I'm getting comments from former members of the church, ex-Mormons, who are somewhat critical of me for just being a member, and they may not realize that I think on an average day I have more in common with a lot of ex-Mormons than I do with a lot of very Orthodox Latter-day Saints. So what I'd like to do in this video is clear up any confusion. I'd like to be very transparent about the way that I present this channel. I don't want my position on anything to be particularly mysterious, and I certainly don't want any feeling of bait and switch to be happening. I am a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and prior to my involvement in LDS culture, the word convert usually was only used as a verb. It was to convert to something. In LDS culture, the word convert is almost always used as a noun, and it is used to describe basically anybody who is baptized after the age of 9 years old. Like many elements of LDS church doctrine, I tend to see conversion as something that is a process rather than something that is a one-time event. I also tend to see conversion as something that applies to all members of the church, even members who were raised in the church and baptized at 8 years old. I think these can have very powerful conversion experiences, and I think that's why the church likes to talk about it sometimes in terms of deepening conversion unto Christ. Conversion is something that we all can experience. I have personally experienced many moments of conversion throughout my life, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share my conversion story on this platform. How I became aware of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, why I joined, and why I am still a member today. And I also want to share my overall experience as a Latter-day Saint, even post-baptism experience. So beginning from the beginning, I grew up in a very strict, far-right, non-denominational household. My parents were devout Christians, but they were notably church hoppers. So for the first 15 years of my life, my family had been affiliated with no fewer than 10 churches, at least that I can remember. My earliest memories of my sense of identity were deeply intertwined with faith and spirituality and my spiritual experiences. I was certainly raised in a bit of a Christian bubble. Virtually all my media was Christian-based. I was raised on Bible stories. I memorized a lot of songs and scriptures. And I also grew up in a pretty volatile and abusive household. So the Bible, which was something that was never ever taken away from me, was my sanctuary for escape. I had read the Old and New Testament probably before the time I hit elementary school. Most of the churches that I went to had adopted influences from either the evangelical or the born-again movements, and there was certainly like an element of mega church culture in a lot of the churches that I attended. One major principle that I remember very clearly, very vividly growing up with is this idea of a right and a wrong way to God. And that came with this idea of there being true Christians and false Christians. The churches that I grew up in and around were notably very anti-ritual. They were anti-commandment almost. They would see the term legalism as a negative word, or look at very Orthodox churches with rich traditions or with a priesthood or anything like that. They would use the word legalism as almost a slur for those churches, as if they were trying to earn salvation or earn their way to God. And the churches that I grew up in were notably anti-religion, or at least they were anti the word religion. They saw it preferable to frame a religious experience as a relationship with God or a relationship with Jesus. And anyone who was pro-ritual, pro-commandments, or pro-legalism, pro-religion were deemed more or less false Christians, or they weren't true Christians. Along with that came the correct way of how to be saved. And I've talked about this a little bit in videos on this channel, kind of the differences between LDS and evangelical culture or mainstream Christian culture. But when I grew up, the way to be saved, that is to say, the way to get into heaven, is you have to say a prayer, and in that prayer you have to confess your sins to God, or perhaps even directly to Jesus. We were always Trinitarian growing up, so we would often begin prayers with "Dear Jesus," and then close prayers with "In your name." There was not a real distinction between Heavenly Father and Jesus, but in order to be saved, you say that prayer, confess your sins to God or Jesus. You say that you believe in Jesus, you want to accept Him into your heart as your personal Lord and Savior, and alakazam, you are in, you are saved. I've kept a lot of journal entries from when I was very young, and when I was 6 years old, my mother began having this conversation with me about the importance of saying that prayer in order to be saved. And there was one night in particular, and I still have a pretty vivid memory of it. My mother came to tuck me in to bed, and she basically asked me if I had ever said that sinner's prayer. And I said no, that I hadn't. And she asked if I would like to. I think she was maybe offering to or volunteering to lead me in said prayer. And I remember very clearly feeling uncomfortable. I felt awkward. And my answer was, "I'm not ready," or "I don't know if I want to." My mother kept probing and trying to figure out why, because in her mind, this was maybe some deficiency within me. And I didn't have any good answers. All I remember saying is, "I'm not ready, and I don't know if I want to do this." My mother became exasperated with me, her 6-year-old, and said that it was up to me whether I wanted to go to heaven or not, and she left my bedroom in kind of a huff and a puff. And I remember laying there for what felt like hours. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I felt a great anxiety. I think part of it was an anxiety about hell, but I think the majority of it was an anxiety about disappointing my mother or disappointing my faith community in some way. And so I felt that even though I wasn't ready, I needed to have good standing with my parents. And so I got out of bed, I got down on my knees and folded my hands up on my mattress, and I said some kind of prayer to the effect that I described. "Forgive me of my sins, I accept Jesus into my heart." And then the next morning I told my mother that I had made the decision to say the prayer. And I think my mother later recounted it as maybe I was shy and wanted to do it on my own, and not so much that I had a crippling anxiety about the situation. I was baptized just before my 7th birthday. Now, in the churches that I grew up in and around, baptism was only a symbol. It wasn't like a saving ordinance of any kind. It was a symbol that you wanted to follow the way of Jesus Christ, and you wanted to be a Christian, and you wanted to symbolically bury your old self and then live a new life. For me, as a 6-year-old, I didn't really know what it meant to change my life, especially because I'd been kind of growing up in and around this sort of teaching and this religious ideology for as long as I could remember. So there was nothing that I was particularly changing, but I did see it as kind of entering into this commitment of trying to be a Christian, or demonstrating to the rest of the world that I'm following in Jesus's example. Baptism was an extremely important event for me because my biological family was much more complicated and much more conditional than I perceived my spiritual family. And so by being baptized and making this commitment to be a Christian, I saw this as kind of being grafted into this larger other family that would accept me if I was good enough, if I was zealous enough, if I loved God enough, if I lived a Christian enough life, which is funny because that's kind of antithetical to the way that they talked about grace versus works. There's nothing you can do to be saved. But I really thought if I am a good enough Christian, so to speak, if I live a proper life, then I'm going to be not only accepted by God, but I'm going to be accepted and loved by my faith community. And so in that moment, I did see it as kind of I was gaining this other family that might love me unconditionally. From that point, I really was all in. Being a Christian became my identity, really my only identity, and it only ramped up as I got older. From a very, very young age, I'd say probably 8, 9 years old, my career goal became either or missionary or pastor. And I didn't know exactly what all that entailed, but I knew that it was deeply tied to something I wanted to be. It was all that I surrounded myself with, and not just the missionary culture, but pastoral culture. I sat out of kids' church. I think by the time I was 9, 10 years old, I was not going to kids' church anymore with all my friends. I was sitting in big church, listening to the sermon, reading the text of the scriptures, taking notes, really internalizing this stuff. My father and I began attending this home teacher. He was like a Bible teacher that he did this in his free time. He was not a trained theologian, but this gentleman was having a hard time finding a church that was really teaching the scriptures. And so he started this nonprofit organization where he was basically just giving out free material. I think he still operates today, teaching verse by verse in the scriptures. I don't think I went to more than 20 lessons with my father. Sometimes we met in this guy's home. He would just open up his home for the public to come in. Sometimes he was able to rent out a space in like a local Christian bookstore. Like I said, not very many times, but it was so influential to me. I remember that was the first time I saw anybody just like this on a whiteboard doing verse by verse in the scriptures. And he would pull out Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and he would travel to places like Turkey and Israel and take photos and put those photos up on the board and say, this is what this place really looks like today. And it brought the scriptures to life in a way that I had never seen done before. And so I looked to that as really the first moment or the first piece of the puzzle to what was actually a very healthy structure that formed later in my life. And what was interesting, it became an interesting theme throughout my life, that the closer I got to that goal of either missionary or pastor, the more I started to deconstruct from faith. And I remember some of my first deconstructive thoughts, faith deconstructive thoughts, happening while I was on these mission trips, namely that I felt awkward or disturbed that the goals of these mission trips were typically more about indoctrination. It was more about helping people become Christian than it was about helping people. These were very concerning thoughts to me that I remember having and just kind of shoving down deep into this place where I wouldn't be so bothered by it or vocalize those concerns. By the time I was 12 years old, I was attending these special youth conferences that taught kids how to proselytize to friends and to strangers. So picture, like, for my LDS friends out there, picture the MTC if you've gone on a mission. It's the MTC except you're a kid, and the entire world and your entire life is the mission field. These youth conferences were filled with charismatic speakers, lots of really great music. They were curated spiritual experiences, and I ate it up, and a lot of other people did too. But because of the way that I grew up, up until that point, I think I internalized a lot of this much deeper. I found that there was some difficulty and some cognitive dissonance in my mind with converting people from other faiths or non-faiths that I didn't understand. And so from the time I was probably about 12 or 13, I really wanted to make it my goal to study other religions, to study world religions. I wanted to read other religious texts. I wanted to, in a perfect world, I would have loved to go to other religious services, but certainly like to read up on their holy books. It was hard for me to tell people that they should believe the Bible when, for example, I'd never read the Quran. I was given access to certain religious pamphlets that were basically polemic against other faiths. So it would be like, here's a list of reasons why Islam is not true. I remember one about Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. Here's why they're cults, right? So I was given access to that, but I was not permitted. And I remember asking a couple of times, but I didn't want to push it because my parents were very opposed to that, especially my mother, to bring in the religious texts of any other religion just to read. It would be like inviting the devil into our home. And so I learned pretty quickly that not only was that not a safe thing to do, but it wasn't a safe thing to ask. I just kind of stopped asking because it was agitating her. What I did do is take every opportunity to study world religions in secret, in private. And so I would go to the library and I would find my way to the religious section and I would just start reading. I had a running list of like all of the religious books that I wanted to acquire. And eventually, like, I've envisioned this bookshelf that was full of all of the religious texts that had ever existed, and or at least the ones that had been printed into English or something, and to be able to like look at that and see it's like a crowned achievement of a collection or something like that. So one of these books on my list was the Book of Mormon. I had had a number of encounters with the Book of Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints throughout my life. One of my earliest memories as a very young child was my mother freaking out, turning the lights off in the house and having us hide behind furniture. She was calling the neighbors and telling them, they're coming down the street, they're coming down the street. And it was the Mormon missionaries that were going door to door, knocking, sharing their gospel. Evidently, I thought these were very scary people. I didn't really exactly know what to think about the drama of hiding behind my own couch until these people were out of our neighborhood. But that was one of my very earliest memories. If anything, it made me curious, like, what are we so afraid of, right? And it was the same thing for like, don't bring the Quran into the house. I was like, well, what are we so afraid of? It makes me want to read the Quran even more. I remember at one point that my mother finally worked up the courage to like open the door to the missionaries, but she was going to try to convert them to her brand of non-denominational evangelical Christianity. I remember sitting on the porch and I saw them as two full-grown men in ties looking back. I was just so little. They're probably 18, 19-year-old kids in name tags and ties, and just chatting with my mother. And I remember my mother being a little belligerent and a little rude, probably a bit disrespectful, telling them things like they were in a cult and they didn't know they were in a cult, and telling them that their highest leaders had secret knowledge that they weren't revealing to them. And I think like the religious communities I grew up in didn't really have a distinction between Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, and Scientology. It just kind of all got blended into one. But I remember the missionaries being very calm and saying, they respected her beliefs, and if she wasn't interested in studying, they'd just be on their way. They tried to give her a copy of the Book of Mormon, and she refused that. When I was about 11 or 12, I was at an event. What I didn't know at the time is that it took place inside a chapel. It was in a meeting house of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My father went with me, and I remember chatting with one of the kids who was around my age. And he made a comment to me, I'll never forget it. He said, "You remind me of Joseph Smith." And I said, who's Joseph Smith? And the way that this kid, just like deer in the headlights, like it was crazy that I didn't know who this guy was. And he said he was a prophet. And I just remember thinking, I've never, like, it was just kind of an odd interaction. We just stopped talking about it. I just remember thinking, I've never heard of a prophet, Joseph Smith. So when I went back home, I asked both of my parents sitting in the living room, I said, who is Joseph Smith? And my mother, of course, turns to my father. "Where did you take him?" Joseph Smith was a cult leader. He was a bad man and he didn't believe in Jesus. That's all I knew. When I was about 13, I remember walking through the thrift store with my mother and my sister. We were downtown at this thrift store. I gravitate towards the books, as always, and I find a copy of the Book of Mormon. Oh, if only I had whatever it was, $2 on me, maybe even $1. My mother was the one with the money, and I worked up enough courage to ask, "Mom, is it okay if I presented it in the nicest, absolutely not. Put that back." So I came so close. I literally had it in my hands. Nope. Wasn't allowed. And then a couple years later, we're attending this new church. Our church has a library. I doubt it was a missionary, but probably a friend of someone who invited them to this church, and they were a member. They brought in a copy of the Book of Mormon and snuck it into our library. Well, I was with a couple of other of my peers who were also very deep into the evangelical hole like I was. And they were like, "Ooh, that book shouldn't be here. We need to tell an adult." And I remember thinking, I got to hide this thing, because if I just sit here holding it, or if I keep it on me, they're going to come take it away from me. And so I ran downstairs. I'm looking for a place to hide this Book of Mormon so I can come back for it later. And I don't even remember where I put it. I think I put it in a drawer, under some magazines or something. And 5 minutes later, one of my friends, she was the daughter of the pastor. She comes back up and she says, "You hide things like a boy." And I looked down the hall and her dad's got it in his hand. She had found it and given it to her dad, and I'm sure he went and threw it away or destroyed it in some way. And I thought, man, I keep having these, I'm so close. I keep having these interactions with the Book of Mormon where I'm so close to getting it, and then it slips out of my hands. Maybe it's just not meant to be. Now, I really didn't stop studying world religions, and certainly didn't stop procuring texts from religions or trying to, really until I was in my early 20s. But between the ages of 14 and 16, I had become very openly, bravely, and openly atheist, which was not a very safe thing for me to say, but I felt so weighed down by the version of Christianity that I had been presented with, and the version that I had been living. My parents kicked me out of the house for a time. So when I was 14 and 15, I was living with my grandmother for a bit. I was going to church with her, another kind of evangelical thing. I felt just no spark. I felt no spark of faith or inspiration. And whenever I would talk to my parents about it, they were very openly antagonistic of me. My mother would mock me for how stupid I was for not believing in God, and how gullible I was for succumbing to secular philosophies. And of course, that does not make me want to come back to the fold. It pushes me farther away. I really have been more or less fully on my own since I was 15, 16. When I was 16 and I was living on my own, I somehow got a group of friends who were all Stone Campbellite Church of Christ members, and loved these guys, did Bible studies with them, and just other fun things. And I remember reading like through some of the sections in the New Testament about baptism, and hearing things they had to say about baptism being a saving ordinance. And that was almost something that was heresy growing up for me. Like, baptism's only a symbol. It does nothing, because nothing you can do gets you into heaven. Unless, of course, you're counting saying a prayer, but that's not something you do. I don't know how they rationalize that. But yeah, I remember thinking, man, I've been reading the Bible my whole life, reading the New Testament my whole life. It's very clear in the Bible that baptism is necessary for salvation, and it's never dawned on me. I remember having this conversation with my buddy Frank. We had a long conversation about baptism and the significance of baptism, and why the Stone Campbellite Church of Christ denomination really emphasizes it. And I thought back to my own baptism, especially after I had kind of had this prayer thing forced on me. And I started to think, like, I wonder if that counted. Like, I wonder, like, I was 7 years old. You can't consent to anything at 7, let alone a lifelong commitment to God. But like, I wasn't even sure I wanted to say a prayer or, maybe even be baptized. I was just doing it because I felt like I was going to make people proud of me, or I felt like I should. And so I thought I should get baptized. Like, now that I know the purpose, I fully understand the purpose of baptism, maybe that means something else. And so I was baptized as a member of the Church of Christ, which I had no idea at the time was out of a restorationist movement. The Stone Campbellite movement was alive and well in Joseph Smith's culture when he when he grew up. So already have this kind of loose connection now at the age of 16 years old to Joseph Smith in the form of being part of this restorationist church. Now, even though this was a revitalization of faith for me, I still heavily struggled with having any kind of religious identity that wasn't extreme. Certainly struggled with having a religious identity that wasn't rooted in some kind of elitism, some kind of this idea of I have the right way to God and I am a true Christian, implying there are those who don't have the right way to God and are not true Christians even though they think they are. It was so rooted in my head like a virus. I just didn't know how to pull it out. And so from the time I was 16 to about 20, I was off and on again Christian, but when I was on, I was on. I was very extreme, perhaps even more extreme than that 12, 13-year-old me. I was the worst kind of Christian. I was probably very annoying. I did not have very many friends. I was probably a tad bit confrontational with people. And ultimately, I wasn't happy. I was so miserable. I ignored what was extremely severe depression. I was so depressed. And I thought that if I could replace my depression, or like push my depression down and like fill it with zealousy for God, that would like do the trick. I also was like deeply agnostic. And that's a theme that kept popping up in my life, no matter how nose to the grindstone. What is that? Is that the right expression? Shoulder to the grindstone? Anyway, no matter how deeply I was in it, in the Christian, going through the motions, wanting to be a Christian even at times, and being this very intense version of it, I was deeply agnostic. I really didn't know what I thought about God. I didn't know what I thought about the existence of a God. I couldn't visualize some of these things that were supposed to be very real in front of me as a true Christian. And so not only did I push down my depression in exchange for zealousy, I pushed down my agnosticism in exchange for faith. And I felt that the more faith and the more zealousy that I brought to the table, that I would be rewarded for it. And so in that process, like I said, I mean, between 16 and 20, I'm on and off again Christian, but I became what the ex-Mormon community now calls PIMO or PIMO. I'm physically in this, but I'm mentally checking out, physically and mentally out. But I started developing this philosophy. I felt that no church was 100% true, that no church contained anything that could be called the fullness of the gospel. I believed that Jesus wasn't in charge of any of the churches on earth. I was disgusted that a lot of Christians dismissed the Old Testament because of a new covenant, because the entire premise of Christianity is predicated on knowledge of covenant, and I just didn't feel like a lot of Christians even knew what that was. I knew that I couldn't have verbalized it very well, even growing up in my very religious circles. I also started to have a kind of inner debate with myself about the nature of sin and the nature of free will. I really struggled with the story of Adam and Eve and the fact that God essentially gives Adam and Eve a false choice, and we're all condemned in a life of sin because of a false choice. I started dabbling, I think by the time I was 17, 18 maybe, I started dabbling in Calvinism for a bit and attended a Calvinistic church because it was easier for me to sit with this idea that God has saved saved or damned everyone before we're ever born. It's this predestination kind of thing. That was easier for me than this idea that our free will had been hacked. So I sat with that strangely for a bit, and then the doctrine of hell itself really bothered me. This idea, so Calvinism didn't last long because this idea of a loving God, and I conceptualized it like if even one of his children, if he knew beforehand that they were going to end up in hell, that it would be more loving and more merciful for him to never create humanity whatsoever. So I really struggled with that. I'm about 18 at this time. I had just turned 18. The thought dawned on me. I just kind of remembered, oh, I never got around to finding a Book of Mormon. It was still on my list. And so I typed in, I think this was my very first smartphone. Must have been like an iPhone 4 or something like that, because I distinctly remember typing Mormon into the GPS, and it navigates me to my local stake center. And I walked in, and I was like trying to act like I wasn't completely lost. And these two young men in white shirts and ties, they walk up to me and they ask basically if they can help me with anything. And I asked if I could speak to a priest. And they both looked at each other, and then they looked back at me, and the one said very confidently, "We are priests." And I just stared at them blankly. I think I'd already made myself as someone who really didn't belong, so to speak, and I didn't want to question it. And I just said, "Uh-huh. So I'm looking for a copy of your holy book, and wondering if you would maybe have a copy that I could buy from you or something like that." And the one pulls a copy of the Book of Mormon out of his backpack, and he hands it to me. And I said, "Do I owe you anything for this?" They said, "No, it's free." And then they said, "Would you be interested in having, like sitting down and talking about the Book of Mormon? It maybe be helpful for you to have like a historical background about the book and how it came to be before you start to read it." I said, "Sure." So we ducked into this Relief Society room, or maybe it was even like a small classroom. We sat down in these little chairs, and audience of one, I'm sitting there and they're facing me, and they pull out this book. It's like it's like a notebook kind of a thing with pictures on it. And it's like a flip book with pictures. You remember the flip books? I think we proceeded to talk for 2 hours. They went through at least one flip book. I don't know if there was more than one. And I was just so drawn in. I found it more fascinating than I thought I would. We proceeded to meet probably every week, if not multiple times a week, for almost the next year. It was definitely the next 8 months. I think we even pushed it into close to a year. It was very clear from early on they wanted me to be baptized. They had me on date for baptism 3 times. I told them each time it wasn't going to happen. I struggled, not just with the commandments. I struggled with the idea of being converted. Because at this point, I had been trained to be the converter. I had been trained by the churches I grew up in from such a young age that I had all the answers, and I was the one to go out and make disciples of all nations. So now that I was kind of on the other side of this table, on the other side of this discussion, where I was the one that didn't have all the answers, and there was this expectation where maybe I would join them, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. But they answered pretty much every question I ever had. And those that they couldn't answer right away, they went and got answers and came back to me with those answers. They were kind, they were patient. I was a little nervous about meeting with them so often. I was very cautious just because of the stigma that the church had in my churches growing up, right? We had always referred to them as a cult. And so I distinctly remember sometimes even before having missionary lessons with them or before entering a chapel or a meeting house or attending church with them, I would pray that God would protect me, that God would protect my mind and protect my heart. I felt that their answers, at least theologically, resonated with me, answered a lot of my questions that I had had from childhood that the churches I grew up in and around could not answer. They seemed open and ready to be able to answer some of these things, like my questions about sin and agency, free will, and hell and heaven and things like that. And so I was pleasantly surprised. All of my discussions with the missionaries and with the members that I interacted with were so positive and so pleasant. That summer, I read through the Book of Mormon. Well, it was summer and fall. I read through the Book of Mormon twice. I remember how it made me feel. I marked up the Book of Mormon, hundreds of underlined and notations and questions, and I asked probably hundreds of questions. The missionaries would always ask me what I had been reading. I would share it with them. Sometimes I would get argumentative. Sometimes I would get even combative. But I remembered I felt light. I remembered I felt, I wouldn't say joy per se, but I just felt there was this lightness about my mood. Whenever I would read the Book of Mormon, there was just something about it that made me, it wasn't necessarily a page turner, but it made me want to keep coming back to it. Eventually, after it was very clear that I was not going to be baptized, I was not ready to make that jump, they dropped me. Looking back, I think they were more patient than maybe they should have been. I will never forget I'll call him Elder M. I don't know if he wants me to say his real name on here. Elder M. He had not been transferred for, it was months. I think he served a third of his mission just teaching me. This, 19-year-old kid, maybe 20. He says, John, if you ever change your mind, I will fly back out here and I will baptize you. And that just stuck with me. That he believed in me and that he would remain dedicated to me enough to stay in contact in the very least and even fly back out and baptize me. Over the next 4 years, like I said, I kept my LDS scriptures. I returned to them from time to time. I think by the time I was in my early 20s, I sold off my library. That beautiful collection that I'd always been envisioning kind of brought me more pain than anything, knowing that it was the result of a lot of weird religious radicalization and trauma. and just like overzealousy for things. I wanted to be more normal, and yeah, I sold a lot of it off, but I kept my LDS scriptures. I would occasionally reach out to missionaries, or like if I saw missionaries, I'd like flag them down and I'd go buy them lunch and we'd just talk a little bit about the Book of Mormon. And I'd make it very clear I don't want to study with you and I don't want to get baptized, but I'm happy to treat you to, lunch and chat. That was like a routine for me. Over the months and years, even though I'm not willing to join the church, I find myself being a bit of an apologist for the church. Somebody says something negative about Mormons, I find myself defending the church. I find myself correcting misinformation about the church. I don't know why I feel that need, but it happens more than once. I developed this fascination with Mormon temples, and I find myself making jokes about marrying a Mormon girl so I can see the inside of one. There's this thing about it that has started to attach to like an identity thing as part of me. Come around to January of 2018, and I just was having a rough time. I was really depressed. It was winter, so the depression was worse. I'm driving on the interstate back home, and this word pops into my head, Monson. And it's one of those things where you know it, but you can't place it. And so I'm sitting there saying it, Monson, Monson, Monson. What is Monson? I just pull out my phone while driving, and I type in Monson. And of course, President Thomas S. Monson pops up. Then it all comes back to me. Oh, yes, but Monson. President Monson, Mormon Monson. And news headlines at the top of the page, he had just died like a couple weeks earlier. And in that moment, something just, I don't know if I would say breaks within me, but I feel a deep sorrow that I don't know I've ever felt before. I would compare it with the level of sadness I would feel if one of my beloved pets died. I just felt so sad, to the point where I was sobbing like a baby. Grown man sobbing in my car, crying, to the point where I think I'm going to have to pull over because I can't see the road with the tears in my eyes. I pull myself together after some time, feels like minutes, I don't know how long. I pull myself together, and then I'm like, what the hell was that? There's just this moment of like, why did I react that way? And now I'm starting to have this moment of honesty within myself where I say, something in my soul, if I believe in a soul, is mourning the loss of someone who was revered as prophet. And I feel that loss from this earth. And I don't know how I can feel that if there's not some validity to it, at least to me. And this eventually leads to a place, I don't know if it was in the same day, but certainly within that week as I'm thinking about this, where I just kind of make this decision. Because I'm realizing that my life has had a pattern of the Book of Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints popping up. And I've ignored it for the most part. I've pushed it away, I've dismissed it, I've rationalized it, I have said, not interested, but it keeps popping up. And in a way, it's like pursuing me. And my fear is either this thing is going to chase me around for the rest of my life, or I ignore it long enough and then it just goes away. And then I'll never know. I'll never know why it was following me around, if there is a reason, and I'll never know what could have been. And so I come to that conclusion and I decide I have to make a choice like soon, whether or not I'm going to get baptized. And that's going to be a permanent decision, one way or the other. I went on to Amazon. I purchased a used Book of Mormon online because my old one had been used as a place to stash my weed for some time, and it just wasn't in very good condition. Not proud of that, but I ordered a new Book of Mormon, decided I was going to start reading the scriptures again. And I did. That year I went on a cross-country bus trip. I was on the bus for something like, I don't even know how many hours, like 70, 80 hours in total. And it was sometime on that trip, and I was journaling a lot on that trip. I decided I'm going to get baptized. Like, this is going to happen. I eventually, that summer, I get in touch with missionaries. I work up the courage to do it. Third time's a charm. We sit down for our first meeting. In their mind, this is lesson number 1. And I said, gentlemen, elders, I think I call them elders, I would like to get baptized. And they said, great. It was the best investigator ever. I started taking the missionary lessons, and I'm just able to check all the boxes, right? I feel like I've developed this testimony of President Monson, who is passed from this earth now. But if I have a testimony of President Monson as a prophet, then that means President Nelson is a prophet. And that means that whole line of men are true prophets. That means Joseph Smith was a prophet. If Joseph Smith was a prophet, that means that the Book of Mormon is from God. And if the Book of Mormon is true at any level, then the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the Lord's church on earth today. For me, it was just this very logical conclusion from that very powerful, subjective, but powerful experience. Found a way to get in touch with Elder M from 5 years prior. It is not hard to find people in the church. It's a little scary. I think after 2 or 3 phone calls, I had his cell phone number. I knew he had lived in Montana at one point, so I started with a meeting house up there and worked my way around. He had moved to Idaho, was living with his wife and their child in Idaho. He was working as a state trooper at the time, and called him on his cell phone. In the middle of the day, he answers the phone. This is Officer M. And I said, hey, I think I called him Elder. Elder M. I don't know if you remember me, but this is John. And I just wanted to call you and tell you that I've made the decision to be baptized. And he said, almost no hesitation, I always knew that you would call. And I didn't even know what to say to that. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. It just sounded like I was a buddy catching up. I said, Elder M, I know that you offered at one point to fly back out and baptize me, but you've got a wife and kid now. You made that offer when you were like 19. And I said, I'd like to offer to do the opposite. I wonder if I can fly out to you, and could you baptize me in Idaho? He said, when are we doing this? And so we set a date in September. I remember my baptism day, showing up, they'd passed around the word with their ward mission team, I'm sure, 20, 30 people that I don't know show up to support me. Felt so cool. I felt such a peace that day. I remember writing about it. There was a gentleman, I don't know who he was. He was serving a service mission with his wife. And I don't remember in what capacity. He might have just been part of the ward. But he came up to me after my baptism, and he congratulated me. We shared some words, and he pulled a lapel pin off of his coat, and he handed it to me. It's a Northern Star pin. You've probably seen me wear it from time to time in these videos. I still have it, still wear it. He said, something to the effect of this is a symbol of looking to that northern star, looking for guidance, looking to the Lord for direction. And if you do that, you're going to have a beautiful covenant path in front of you. And man, I just felt so special. Nothing could break that calm. I like to joke, this is not necessarily relevant, but I think it's funny. I like to joke that I was a Mormon for 3 weeks, because 3 weeks after I got baptized was General Conference, and it was President Nelson's famous talk of the correct name of the church. We were no longer to call ourselves Mormons. We were Latter-day Saints, or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I think it's funny that I was a Mormon. I called myself Mormon for 3 weeks. Since that time, I have felt the powerful presence of what I call God in my life. I have felt indescribable love and joy. In a few instances, when I went through for my initiatory and endowment, I was able to go through, for those of you who've watched this channel, you've known I went through Salt Lake Temple just a couple weeks before it closed for renovations. It was like a year and change later, a year and change after my baptism. I invited a lot of people. Elder M was there, and some missionary friends I'd met along the way and their families. And so, I was already like a blubbering mess by the time I was at the veil saying that name. Such a powerful experience. Having researched a lot about the endowment before I went through, I was just prepared in such a way that it was such an unforgettable, wonderful moment for me. And then walking into the celestial room and feeling like I'm walking into this room filled with people that are there for me, waiting for me, elders and sisters and friends. And it was something that was once in a lifetime. I've never experienced anything quite like it. I have noticed that typically before every covenant or every kind of blessing experience, there is like an adversity in my life. And that's something that has come up. It's something that has shaped what could be called my testimony. I try to base my testimony on things very objective, or at least recognize when there is a subjective experience influencing my thoughts or my feelings or my decisions. Something that is an undeniable pattern that pops up is right before I go to make a covenant, right before a significant blessing in my life. There's like this wall of chaos that I either have to climb over, walk around, or break through. And that has been a constant piece of advice that I've given to those who are about ready to go in for baptism, or really anything pertaining to the church, is, look, the church teaches that there is an adversary. The church teaches that there will be adversity to obedience to God. Following my baptism in the church, I was inactive on and off for about 2 years. And this was due to a number of things, but namely some pretty severe mental health issues that I just had left unaddressed. Throughout my inactivity, I never denied my powerful experiences. In fact, I held them very dearly. There was definitely a time that I didn't know if I was going to come back to church, just due to the state of my mental health and some struggles that I was having. I had blocked everyone on my phone, not blocked everybody from church. I had really distanced myself. One day I receive a voicemail. I look at my phone and I have a voicemail. It's a blocked voicemail. If you're not aware of like how iPhone blocking works, you're not going to get a call. You're not going to get a text. So if people had been calling me and texting me, I wasn't getting those. But you do get voicemails. This particular voicemail was from a brother from my current ward, and it was the brother who had conferred the Melchizedek priesthood onto me. And the voicemail was simple enough. He just said he was calling to say hi, wondered if I wanted to chat, give him a call back. I didn't even have his number anymore. Like, I wouldn't have been able to call him because I not only blocked all the numbers, but I took their contact out of my phone. So I had a list of just random block numbers in my phone, and whatever prompted him to leave a voicemail rather than just shoot me a text, we ended up meeting. I met with this gentleman in a public place. We went and grabbed, I think, just a bite to eat or something. He asked me how I was doing, and I just info dumped on him. I gave him far too much. I think I actually scared him a little bit, but told him that I kept all these sacred things, these sacred experiences in my heart, and that I knew that the Spirit wanted me to have those, and that I knew it was possible for me to come back and be active in the church. But I told him, I don't even know if I'm worthy enough to wear garments right now. He said, brother, that is going to be something that you should talk to the bishop about. We had such a wonderful meeting. It was funny because I shared so much about like faith and religion, and I was having an identity crisis, and part of that was religious identity. And he is like, I remember him saying, I don't really know what you're talking about, but I didn't reach out to you because I wanted you to come back to church. I just reached out because I missed you. I wanted to see how you were doing. And it really spun this expectation that I have of judgment just completely around, and it dissipated all my fears. I went back and chatted with my bishop, who he had seen me at my worst. I think he'd seen me at a really tough moment mentally, like a year back. He knew I was struggling. Talked with my bishop, went through like a confession of sorts. I told him I was not keeping the word of wisdom, among some other things. And he said, like, you're good to put the garments back on. And I said, I don't feel worthy. Like, there's this piece of worthiness in LDS culture that I just felt like was weighing me down. And he said, I want you to open up your scriptures. And we turned to the book of Moses. We read through some passages about the garment and about the atonement of Christ. And he said, he had me read these verses. He said, you may not be worthy to wear these garments, but Jesus Christ made it possible for you to wear that garment. It's a gift for you because of Christ's atonement. It's a representation of Jesus Christ. And there was this moment where I wanted to fight with him on it. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't come up with a reason. And so I said, all right, I guess I'll go put my garments back on, and I'll see you on Sunday. He authorized me to go partake of the sacrament for that brother who had reached out to me to bless it in his home. And so I went to his home, and that was another one of those powerful experiences that I would say was a conversion moment for me. When he said that prayer that we hear every Sunday, O God, the eternal Father, we ask thee in the name of Jesus Christ to bless and sanctify this bread, water, to the souls of all those who partake of it. And I just remember thinking in that moment, it's me. Like, all who partake of it is me in this case. Like, it's an audience of one. That prayer in this moment is for me, and blessing the sacrament for me to partake of it. And that is a feeling that has stuck with me nearly every time I partake of the sacrament in the big group now. I hear that prayer and I think, even if I was the only person in this room, it's for me. I got up and I walked out of his house, and I remember just feeling this weight that had lifted off of me. It was like a burden had been shed. And as I was walking into my car, I literally said out loud, wow. And I get into my car and I'm having this thought of, this is what I used to feel like. This is what I used to feel like all the time when I joined the church, when I was baptized. This is the lightness that comes with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's something that I'd forgotten. And I remember thinking, how could I have forgotten how light I feel? So I do feel in that moment, I also got to partake of like a real dose of a renewal of baptismal covenants. Because we talk about that sacrament is a renewal of your baptism day. And I really felt in that moment just like a dose of my baptism day. I mentioned my work schedule over the next 3 months. My work schedule was horrible. I was working every Sunday. I do remember at one point, like I heard whispers in the wind about my bishop having said in a meeting, if the people who aren't coming to church, if they were really committed to the Lord, they would be here. I remember feeling so guilty about that, feeling I really do want to be there. I really like I am active now, but like my work schedule's causing me to be inactive. I was working healthcare at the time too, so it was like I can't just like we have vulnerable people and patients that we have to work on Sundays. There's no option. Because of that, I started attending the YSA ward. I was really skeptical about the YSA ward. I did not want to attend because I think in my mind the YSA ward, young single adult ward, had this reputation for like you're going to meet your forever person there. You're going to go there to meet your spouse. And I was like I don't want to get married. I'm not in a place to get married. I don't want to get married. And so why would I go to the YSA ward? But there was the only time that I could attend church. The YSA met at like 3 p.m. on Sunday. I couldn't go early, but I could like show up early to work up until like right before 3 and duck out and go to the YSA ward. Or sometimes I'd go to the YSA ward and come back to work and kind of make up my time for a couple of hours. And it was at this YSA ward that I met my wife. And I remember thinking in hindsight, like, all that time I was complaining and praying for the Lord to like make it possible for me to go to work or go to church on Sunday morning. I was feeling like really down and weighed down about myself. And all the while, it was really, if things are meant to be, this one really was meant to be. I felt such a confirmation from the Spirit that that she was the right one for me, and went through a lot of really powerful spiritual experiences there where I don't know that either of us were really looking to get married at the time, and within 6 months, married in the Philadelphia temple. Over the next 2 years, we worked and we served in callings. At this time, I began working on my verse-by-verse Old Testament commentary in written form. And I also was introduced to being the teacher in a couple of callings. So I was called as an early morning seminary teacher in my stake. And then after that was a gospel doctrine adult Sunday school teacher. Both of those experiences were transformative. I talk about them a little bit in my book, Famine in Zion. Both of those experiences solidified my understanding of my own gift of my spiritual gift of teaching. In fact, I had a gentleman who was my bishop for quite a while, and after hearing me teach for a few lessons in a row, I suppose, literally approached me and told me, "John, you have the spiritual gift of teaching." And I never felt that I did. I have never felt like I'm very well learned. I'm well read, but I'm not necessarily good at expressing concepts. I don't feel like I'm good at speaking. I get very nervous about public speaking. I even get nervous in front of the camera. Believe it or not, I have to like work myself up for 5 to 10 minutes before I even record a video, any one of these videos that you see on this platform. But I felt a peace to these callings, and especially as I would get into my lesson, maybe 5 minutes in, and that adrenaline would kind of wear off. I felt like I tapped into something that I hadn't experienced before, where I was able to bring the scriptures to light in a way that I feel was well received, generally well received by those that I was teaching. In 2024, we received a revelation from the Lord to move to Missouri. This was kind of a multi-part revelatory thing and involved some life circumstances at the time. We went to the temple to pray about it, and one clear element that stood out to me in this revelatory thing was that when we moved to Missouri, that I would be teaching the scriptures. And we uprooted within like 6 weeks and moved from the East Coast to this brand new area. And quite honestly, it's been kind of a terrible experience. You were nodding your head. My wife is nodding her head. Yes. On one hand, I have seen the hand of God in many, many ways. On the other hand, there have been incredible challenges for the both of us out here. Over the summer, I began this channel, putting out videos, verse by verse commentary. This was also the time when my wife and I began having more serious gospel discussions, which we'd always talked about, but having a platform like this to do verse by verse scripture study was a way for us to engage more seriously on that. Throughout that process, I began realizing that my wife's experience in growing up in the church, as well as the experience of many others, were not very healthy and were not very transparent. As a convert who studied the church for like 5 years before I ever stepped into the waters of baptism, I knew a lot about church history, especially Joseph Smith history, and I kind of assumed that a lot of members at least had a template for that, that they had a general understanding of a lot of things that I began realizing they don't. There have been a few moments over the last 7 months that were as shocking to me as they were to my wife. As we began having discussions about these things, they were shocking to her because she was discovering things that she did not know as a lifelong member of the church. They were shocking to me because I was realizing that my wife and people like my wife have been raised in the church and kept in the dark, even actually lied to on many occasions. We got to this place where we were talking about our differences in terms of our different experiences in this church. And I think what we landed on is I said, I didn't join a cult, but you were raised in one.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to wrestle with. The way that this affected you affected me deeply. And my love for you has not at all diminished. I have never been disappointed in a decision that you've made in this process. I've always been in your corner. I have always said, continue to say, I don't think anyone leaves the church for a bad reason, any more than anyone would join the church for a bad reason. And I have great empathy for you as someone who grew up in a cult, a high demand, high control or religious organization concerned more with obedience and behavior than true conversion to God. I don't feel that I'm in a cult right now, but I think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints can be a cult for some people. And that's a hard nuance for me to hold, but I do hold it fairly well. And I think that I've felt the Spirit through your exit. You know the spirit in which I say that. I'm not saying that to confirm my belief or anything, but I'm just saying I felt a great peace in the process of you exiting and feeling that this is right. It's right for you, that you need time to heal. And so as you made your way out of the church in the last 6 months or so, I've had to kind of relocate my own position within it. And I'd say within a few weeks of you telling me that you think you're done, I realized that my efforts to simply teach the restored gospel in this format with an academic lens, right? I thought that was really nice, but I just felt in that moment it's not enough. That there's a responsibility to inform where information has been withheld, and there's a responsibility to gently nudge people toward a position of critical thought, critical analysis, without feeling like we're trying to rob someone of their faith. Because there are so many people, including former members of the church, ex-Mormons, PMO members, physically and mentally out members, and dare I say, active, faithful members of the church who desperately need healing in one form or another. And if a verse-by-verse scriptural analysis showing true history, true transparency, true reflection, and compatibility or incompatibility with an LDS lens, whatever that looks like, if that can provide any nourishment or healing to any of those groups of people, and then add on top of that never Mormons, non-members, man, I think that's a worthy cause. High demand, high control religious organizations, they tend to create false binaries in people. It's all or nothing. It's black or white. I guess I deconstructed from that very early in my life. And once you deconstruct from one toxic religious thing, I think it's easy to not construct another toxic religious thing as it pops up. I've never seen things as binary. And so for that reason, there's no fear or pressure or concern when any of my loved ones, I mean, you're not my first friend or loved one that has left the church or a church or whatever. And I've never felt that that was an earth-shattering thing. I think deconstruction is a beautiful thing. I think deconstruction allows you to build something back better or stronger than it was before, whatever that looks like. And truthfully, I think I have empathy for it because I think I've always been agnostic. Like from the very moment I was like in that bed at 6 years old and being kind of coerced into this sinner's prayer thing that I really wasn't sure about, my earliest memories of my religious experiences were curated around me, crafted around me, but I don't know where my voice was in all of that. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. So some of my on and off again and active and inactive, I think over the years stems from that deep agnosticism within me. I think that's what allows me to have a deep respect for those who leave and who have the courage to leave, because sometimes it can be very scary. And yeah, because at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, what do we know? That's a hard thing, I think, for really devout Orthodox Latter-day Saints, because this is the church of we know, right? This is the church of when we say testimony, we know. And we stand up there and you'll see it, fast and testimony meeting especially, but really every week and in every context, people just bear their testimony at you. I know the church is true. I know Joseph Smith's a prophet. I know the Book of Mormon is the Word of God. I know this is his restored gospel. The priesthood is his power on earth. I know Jesus lives. I don't know any of that. I don't, I believe a lot of that. That's my faith. I think faith is that belief without evidence. Ironically, testimony is the opposite of faith. It's the belief with a lot of evidence. But a lot of times people bear testimony about things that are just there's not evidence for. And I wrestle with that. When I bear my testimony, it's a little dry. That's why I don't bear my testimony very much, aside from the public speaking thing. Because I just I don't know a lot. I believe a lot. I have a lot of faith, but I just don't know. And I don't have that piece of hubris that maybe I once had, that I'm on the top of the world. I'm a true Christian. And all these other people maybe aren't as true as I am. I think that's stupid. I believe in objective reality, but I just don't know that certain things can be grouped under that, especially when a lot of religious testimonies are built from a compilation of subjective experiences. So I genuinely believe that there are some people out there who shouldn't join my church. And I believe that there are people out there who are in my church that should probably leave for them to be healthier. Who's to say my subjective experiences trump somebody else's? In my mind, religious conviction is the sum total of all of your subjective experiences, but who is to say mine trump somebody else's? I think subjective experiences really just trump inner doubt. I think that's kind of what happens when we have like these building testimony experiences that are based on subjective experiences. They don't necessarily answer the hard questions. They just make it easier to sit with. They make the agnosticism a little less agnostic. In other words, I think a lot of times subjective religious experiences tend to suspend the need for critical thought or further thought on an issue or a topic. So when I teach in the scriptures, I feel I mean, when I'm doing something like this, I feel like I tap into something. And I don't know what that something is. I'm going to call it the light of Christ because that kind of sums up how I understand it. But when I teach verse by verse in the scriptures, I do feel that power. I have made a commitment that I'm never, ever going to lie to someone to help them come around to my faith. I'm not going to lie about my experiences, and I'm not going to lie about the gospel. I'm not going to lie about church history. I'm not even going to lie about where I deviate from orthodoxy. I'm also not going to deny my testimony, is the other thing too. Because all of those experiences that I've had and all of the adversity I've overcome to receive certain blessings in my life and confirmation of blessings in my life, that means something to me. And it's very significant. So I hold both. I love this church. I love this gospel. If I can look at Scripture with an academic and objective lens and still feel that spark of inspiration, that feeding of a hunger, that healing of a spiritual ache, then I'm not going to deny the presence of some kind of divine power there. If that isn't godly or Christ-like, then I don't know what is, or I don't know what to call it. I do know that humans tend to look for purpose in life. I don't know if that's in vain or not, but I'll tell you that my journey in this church, all the way up until right now, all of my conversion moments up until right now, and especially what I do now in exercising my spiritual gift of teaching the scriptures and sharing the gospel with strangers on the internet and with my beautiful wife here, that's as close to my life purpose as I feel I ever will get. I look forward to all of the years to come in this channel. I look forward to continuing to make a stand in my life for scriptural literacy, whatever that looks like. And I look forward to raising children in a mixed faith household. I absolutely look forward to it. And just being my most authentic self on this faith journey. So this has been extremely long-winded. If you've made it this far, I love you dearly. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Thank you for letting me share my life with you. And I will leave these things with you in the name of Jesus Christ.